don't have no culture, you'll create nothing. No inventions, no food, no nothing. You'll bring nothing to the table. Name me one thing that Puerto Ricans did that changed the whole world. Just one thing that a Puerto Rican created that changed the whole world. Just one thing. What do you bring to the table? What do you bring to the table as Puerto Ricans? What do Puerto Ricans bring to the table when it comes to society? What do they bring? They have no culture, not their language, not their food, not their music. What do Puerto Ricans bring to the table? What? Name me one thing.
In his era, Roberto Clemente was one of the greatest players. He was unique. Clemente played in a way that none of those other great players of that era, Mays, Aaron, or Mantle, did.
Baseball legend Roberto Clemente paved the way for Latinos in the major leagues.
Clemente is best known as that rare ball player who actually grew as a human being as his talents were diminishing. And he became a great humanitarian whose motto was, if you have a chance to help others and fail to do so, you're wasting your time on this earth.
Roberto Clemente was born August 18, 1934, in Carolina, Puerto Rico. In his late teens, his ability caught the eye of Major League scouts.
Clemente signed with the Dodgers in 1954. They'd scouted him and thought he had enormous talent. But because of that potential, the Dodgers actually tried to hide him up in Montreal, and they would not play him.
In 1955, Roberto Clemente was signed by the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he made his big league debut and where he spent the rest of his career.
None of the sports writers in Pittsburgh knew any Spanish. They would quote Clemente in broken English, pidgin English. If he said, I got a hit, they'd say, I got heat, H-E-E-T. That's how they'd spell it in the newspaper. He was an incredibly proud man, and it infuriated him when they did that.
Roberto Clemente comes to bat.
Over the next 18 years, Roberto Clemente quietly became one of the top players in baseball, winning 12 Gold Glove Awards, 4 batting titles, and leading the Pirates to 2 World Series championships.
Roberto Clemente had a gun for a right arm. This guy played right field, and if you even thought about taking an extra base on a hit out to right field, you better think again, because he could gun you down at second base, third base, or at home.
Clemente was the National League MVP in 1966 and played in 15 All-Star games.
To end the game and the series with victory for the Pirates.
In his last regular season game of 1972, Roberto Clemente became the 11th player of all time and the first Latino in history to reach 3,000 hits.
For Roberto Clemente, reaching 3,000 hits allowed him to reach a milestone that Babe Ruth hadn't reached, that Lou Gehrig hadn't reached, that Mickey Mantle hadn't reached. It showed that this was an all-time great player.
On December 31st, 1972, a plane carrying Roberto Clemente crashed off the coast of Puerto Rico. He was on his way to Nicaragua to deliver emergency relief supplies to victims of a devastating earthquake.
When Roberto was killed, it was just stunning. I remember my heart sinking that New Year's Eve. When such a great athlete is killed in his prime, I remember being crushed. I wasn't a Pittsburgh fan. I was just a sports fan. I think it was devastating.
Clemente, by the time he died, was the patron saint of Latin American baseball. When word of his death arose, hundreds and hundreds of people drove to Pinones Beach near San Juan, Puerto Rico, where the plane went down, thinking that Clemente might walk out of the water.
Only 3 months after his death, Roberto Clemente became the first Latino ever to be inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame.
It's hard to say that anyone was the equivalent of Jackie Robinson, but Clemente is the closest thing. He was not the first Latino ball player in the major leagues, but he was the first great one. And because of the way he played and the way he lived, he set in motion a huge migration of Latino ball players into the major leagues.
Roberto Clemente was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002.
Roberto Clemente's legacy is not only being one of the all-time great players, but being one of the all-time great heroes. It's a wonderful legacy. I think he's one of those people that when you say Roberto Clemente, you smile. He was great in so many ways on and off the field.
We are doing Kristen's Kudos a little early today as we continue celebrating Women's History Month. Today we highlight another woman who is changing the science world. Dr. Antonia Novello. I don't know if you know her name. She was the first woman and first Hispanic to become Surgeon General of the United States. She was appointed in 1990 by President Bush after nearly 2 decades of public service at the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Novello grew up in Puerto Rico and was born with a medical condition that could only be treated by surgery. But it wasn't until she was 18 that she finally was able to get the surgery, and she promised herself no one else would ever have to wait that long. Her focus as Surgeon General was on the health of women, children, and minorities. Dr. Novello helped launch early childhood health initiatives and promoted immunization and childhood injury prevention. Kudos, Dr. Novello.
Yes.
Arturo Alfonso Schomburg was born on January 24, 1874, in the town of Santurce in the Captaincy General of Puerto Rico. Schomburg was of mixed heritage and had African and German blood. He was a historian, writer, and activist. He was interested in preserving and promoting the contributions that Afro-Latin Americans and Afro-Americans made to society. He immigrated to New York City on April 17, 1891, and settled in Harlem. He collected literature, art, and other materials of African history. In 1911, he co-founded the Negro Society for Historical Research, along with John E. Bruce. In 1926, the New York Public Library on 135th Street purchased his extensive collection of thousands of pamphlets, drawings, and etchings, 3,000 manuscripts, and more than 5,000 books for $10,000. They appointed Schomburg the curator of the Schomburg Collection of Negro Literature and Art. Today, the 135th Street Library is the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Schomburg is considered one of the leading intellectual figures in the Harlem Renaissance. He died on June 10, 1938, and is buried in Cypress Hill Cemetery.
Doctor, surgeon, scientist, diplomat, writer, abolitionist, humanitarian, revolutionary, these were some of the titles of the man recognized as the father of Puerto Rico. Born in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico on April 8th of 1827 to a privileged, prominent family, Ramon Emeterio Betances was a man for all ages. He was gifted with exceptional virtues, and yet, instead of seeking personal wealth and achievement, he would use his attributes in the service of the poor and the pursuit of Puerto Rican independence from Spain. Betances' commitment to the poor in Puerto Rico were evident. After he finished his studies and became a doctor in France, he returned to Puerto Rico in 1856 to help fight a cholera epidemic that was ravaging the island. Along with another doctor, Jose Francisco Becerra, he dedicated himself to saving the lives of Puerto Ricans, giving them preference over Spanish-born soldiers occupying the island. It's important to also know that Dr. Betances often provided pro bono medical services to the poor. In 1865, he labored for the creation of a city hospital dedicated to treating the poor and marginalized. It was for these reasons that Betances was also referred to as the doctor of the poor. Aside from his concern for the poor, Ramon Betances' dominant and constant concern was the struggle of Puerto Rican independence from Spain. For his work in this field, Betances was often forced into exile by Spanish authorities on the island. His greatest example in this struggle was a revolt known as El Grito de Lares, or the Cry of Lares. It was a major revolt against Spanish rule in Puerto Rico, planned by Betances and Segundo Ruiz Belvis. The revolt began on September 23rd of 1868 in the town of Lares, and it spread rapidly to various revolutionary cells throughout the island. Although El Grito de Lares was a failure in the short term, it was a success in terms of contributing to the idea of Puerto Rican identity. Betances' leadership in this revolt cemented him as the father of the nation. The setbacks of El Grito de Lares forced Betances into exile. He fled to New York City in April of 1869, where he joined several colleagues in his efforts to organize Puerto Rican revolutionaries into additional activities leading to independence. After New York, he spent a short interlude in Haiti at the request of his then president. Then afterwards, he moved to France with his common-law wife, where he continued to fight for Puerto Rico independence for close to 26 years. In 1898, Betances attempted to use his diplomatic contacts to impede a Puerto Rico annexation by the United States, which was deemed imminent and eventually happened on July 25th. Frustrated by what he perceived as the unwillingness of Puerto Ricans to demand their independence from the United States, he uttered his final political stance. I don't want a colony status, neither with Spain nor with the United States. He died shortly after on September 16, 1898 in France. In 1920, his remains were transferred to Puerto Rico. They arrived in San Juan on August 5th and were honored by a crowd then estimated at 20,000 mourners. Ramon Betances became the foundation for those that would later fight for the independence of Puerto Rico, the most prominent being Pedro Albizu Campos.
Dr. Jose Celso Barbosa Alcala. On July 27, 1857, Jose Celso Barbosa Alcala was born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, to working-class parents Hermogenes Barbosa and Carmen Alcala. Hermogenes worked as a brick mason and was the overseer of a sugar mill in San Antonio, Puerto Rico. Barbosa grew up in an environment where he was encouraged to use his education to achieve greatness. He was a great student, which allowed him to attend Puerto Rico's most prominent Jesuit seminary school. Barbosa graduated from the Jesuit Seminary School in 1875, making him the first person of African descent to graduate from the seminary. Soon after graduation, Barbosa began working as a tutor for the children of his father's boss to pay for college. Barbosa was an excellent tutor, in addition to being a great student and a great young man. He was so impressive that his father's boss decided to help Barbosa pay to attend college. After saving enough money to pay for college, Barbosa moved to New York City in 1875 to attend a prep school. At this prep school, Barbosa was able to become fluent in speaking English, fluent enough for Barbosa to attend college in the United States. Barbosa experienced a change of fate within his educational career that affected his life for the better. He became sick with pneumonia in 1876 while living in New York. After being diagnosed by his doctor, he was encouraged to study medicine. Barbosa's original plan was to study law. Later in 1876, Barbosa began attending Fort Edward College in New York. In 1877, he applied to attend the College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University, but was denied admission. Some sources say he was denied because he was a black man. He would later apply to attend the University of Michigan's medical school and was accepted. In 1880, Jose Barbosa graduated as the first person of Afro-Puerto Rican descent from the University of Michigan's medical school. He not only graduated with his medical degree, but he graduated as valedictorian. Shortly after graduation, Dr. Barbosa returned to Puerto Rico to practice medicine with his people. He opened a practice in Bayamon, his hometown, and developed a reputation for providing great medical care to poor Afro-Puerto Rican people. His reputation reached the Spanish authorities, who quickly refused to recognize his medical credentials. At the time, the Spanish authorities only acknowledged medical degrees from Spain. With his medical practice in jeopardy of being shut down, Barbosa reached out to and received help from the American Council. After a heated panel discussion, Dr. Barbosa was allowed to continue to practice medicine in his hometown. He became a member of a Masonic lodge in 1885. Dr. Barbosa married a woman named Jacinta Sanchez Jimenez in 1887. They produced 11 children. He became an educator in 1888, teaching anatomy, obstetrics, midwifery, and natural science at the Puerto Rican Athenaeum, Puerto Rico's oldest cultural institution. Later in 1888, Dr. Barbosa became the Undersecretary of Education for Puerto Rico. Dr. Barbosa is credited with developing the prototype of a health insurance system, the first credit union in Puerto Rico, and establishing a workers' cooperative called El Ahorro Colectivo in 1893. Dr. Barbosa became active in Puerto Rico's political movement in 1883 by becoming involved in various political parties he either founded or became a member of. He founded the Puerto Rican Republican Party in 1899 as an advocate for Puerto Rico becoming free from Spanish rulership. He wanted Puerto Rico to have the freedoms of the United States and supported the U.S.'s annexation of Puerto Rico. Dr. Barbosa's political ideas and activism garnered him the title of Father of the Puerto Rican Statehood Movement. He also founded Puerto Rico's first bilingual newspaper, El Tiempo, in 1907. Dr. Barbosa was receiving much support from fellow Afro-Puerto Ricans. They even joined his Republican Party because they believed in his political ideas of autonomy and independence from Spain. Dr. Barbosa became the first black person to be appointed to the Puerto Rican Executive Cabinet by 4 U.S. presidents from 1900 to 1917. He was also elected to the Puerto Rican Senate in 1917 and served until 1921. Dr. Barbosa was inspired by African American abolitionists, educators, scholars, etc., etc. He used that inspiration to continue providing great medical care to his people, used his political platform to help improve living conditions, and published 40 years worth of articles about civil rights and justice for Afro-Puerto Rican people and people of the African diaspora. Dr. Barbosa was given the Cruz de la Orden del Mérito Naval Award in 1898 and awarded honorary degrees from the University of Puerto Rico. Dr. Barbosa died on September 21st, 1921 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He dedicated over 30 years of his life to serving his people as a doctor, educator, and politician because he wanted his people to live free, healthy, and prosperous lives. To Dr. Jose Celso Barbosa Alcala, we proudly stand on your shoulders.
The first Latina to EGOT, winning an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. Meet Rita Moreno. Born Rosa Dolores Alvario in Puerto Rico in 1931, Rita, or Rosita as her family called her, moved to New York City with her mother when she was only 5. A natural talent, by 10, Rita was singing and dancing at parties and soon started getting roles on the stage and later the big screen. By 22, she was a star, but was frustrated by the roles she was given.
I became the house ethnic, and that meant that I had to play anything that was not American.
By 1962, finally a role she was born to play. Anita, a fellow Puerto Rican, in West Side Story.
Life can be bright in America.
She won an Oscar for her performance, the first Latina to do so.
I can't believe it!
But that didn't mean she got better roles.
I couldn't get a job to save my life. There were a few offers, but the offers that were offered were minor movies with gangs. I just couldn't believe it.
Rita pivoted and turned to TV. In 1973, she won a Grammy for the cast album of The Electric Company. She put the T in EGOT, winning a Tony for The Ritz.
Everything's coming up rusted.
She won an Emmy for her 1977 appearance on The Muppet Show.
You give me fever.
Making her one of just 15 people in the world with all 4 prestigious awards.
I mean, Rita Moreno is thrilled, but Rosa Dolores Alvario from Humacao, Puerto Rico is undone.
Over her 70-year career, Rita Moreno has inspired other Latina performers.
Watching this beautiful, strong Puerto Rican woman command the screen with her talent in a time when Latina women did not have every door in this industry open to them made me feel, as a little girl watching in her living room in the Bronx, that anything was possible.
At 88, Rita's not slowing down. She's producing and starring in a new updated version of West Side Story.
Instead of Doc, who owns the candy store, I am going to play Valentina, who owns the candy store.
And clearly, she'll never stop speaking her mind.
I have no objection to playing a Hispanic. I have every objection to playing a stereotype.
I'm always thrilled when theater gets off the arts page and into our common conversation. My name is Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I'm a composer and a performer. I basically have the best job in the world because I fall in love for a living. I write musicals, and musicals take a long time to write. So when you have an idea, you really have to fall in love with it. My first musical that was ever professionally produced was In the Heights. I started writing that when I was 19 years old. It was an 80-minute one-act, which is about my neighborhood growing up in Upper Manhattan. And I wanted it to sound like if you were walking down 10 blocks in Washington Heights. You're gonna hear salsa music, you're gonna hear hip-hop music, you're gonna hear bachata and merengue. And I wanted it to feel like that, and yet tell the story the way my favorite musicals do. Man of La Mancha, Fiddler on the Roof. And so that's what we did. I grew up in a house full of cast albums, and I think I'm like a lot of people who, Broadway was a very special occasion, but we go every few years or so. And every time we went, it was like the world opened up a little bit. On vacation, I went to Mexico and grabbed a biography at random. It was Hamilton by Ron Chernow, and I fell in love again. Even before I put the book down for the first time, I was already crafting the opening number.
I'm past patiently waiting, I'm passionately smashing every...
With Hamilton, it's a perfect marriage of function and form. Hip-hop is uniquely suited to tell his story growing up, orphaned, penniless. Hip-hop has the energy of revolution, it has the energy of struggle, it has the energy of a story like Hamilton's demands. This is a story about America then, told by America now. And we want to eliminate any distance between a contemporary audience and this story. And I think our casting helps with that. They look like our city and they look like our country. And I think that helps us put ourselves in the founder's shoes. I grew up in an immigrant community. No matter how far you go back, with a few exceptions, everyone came here from somewhere and had to create a life from scratch and had to do a job no one else wanted to do so that their kid could be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. I sort of doubled down on those themes with Hamilton, who really came here with nothing but a letter of recommendation and a few dollars in his pocket, and his wits. I guess more than anything, what this fellowship is it's such a huge vote of confidence and allows me to keep going. All I want to do is have the effect on young audiences and new audiences that shows had on me when I was growing up. And I'd grown up loving musicals, but I didn't know you were allowed to write a musical about your experience. And it can matter and it can be just as vibrant as the ones that are in the canon.
Born on September 12, 1891 in Ponce, Puerto Rico, to a Puerto Rican domestic worker of African ancestry and a Basque merchant from a family of Spanish immigrants, Don Pedro Albizu Campos grew up in a life of poverty. His mother died when he was very young, and his father didn't officially recognize him until he was at Harvard University. Albizu Campos had the fortune to be born with brilliance, which allowed him to be awarded scholarships in prominent schools and therefore provided a ladder to escape poverty. During his studies and at the outbreak of World War I, he volunteered in the United States Infantry. Albizu was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Army Reserves and sent to organize a home guard in Ponce, Puerto Rico. The United States Armed Forces at that time were highly segregated and assigned Puerto Ricans of visible African descent to all black units. They assigned Albizu Campos to the 375th Infantry Regiment, which was an all-black unit. Albizu Campos was honorably discharged in 1919 with the rank of first lieutenant. Albizu Campos graduated on June 23, 1921 from Harvard Law School. Although he had the highest grades in his class and should have given the valedictorian speech at the graduation, his final exams were delayed by a professor who didn't want a valedictorian from Puerto Rico, especially one with noticeable African descent. Soon after graduating, Albizu returned to Puerto Rico. In 1922, he married Dr. Laura Meneses, a Peruvian biochemist whom he had met at Harvard University. Gifted in 8 languages and powerful oratorical skills, Albizu set out to practice law on behalf of the poor. During this time, Albizu was evolving into a nationalist who wanted independence for Puerto Rico from the United States. The more he looked at the political reality, the more militant he became. In 1930, he was elected president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. It's important to note that during this period, Puerto Rico was under military rule by the United States. Puerto Ricans in general were targets of constant harassment and humiliation in their very own land. They were at the whims of the desires of the United States government without any real outlet to address their concerns. Albizu Campos didn't really draw much attention from the U.S. or most Puerto Ricans for that matter until 1934, when he led a sugar strike throughout the island that raised worker wages from 45 cents to $1.50 per 12-hour day. After the success with the strike, Albizu gained popularity throughout the island, and the crowds that he spoke to kept growing. Soon after, the FBI zeroed in on Albizu Campos and started tracking him all over the island. The U.S. government also appointed a new military governor, General Blanton Winship, who militarized the entire police force on the island. On October 24, 1935, Winship's policemen raided a nationalist student rally and killed 4 people, including the treasurer of the Nationalist Party, all in broad daylight in front of witnesses. This became known as the Rio Piedras Massacre. On October 29, 1935, when asked about the Rio Piedras Massacre at a press conference, the military governor's chief of police, E. Francis Riggs, warned that if Albizu Campos continued his agitation, there would be war to death against all nationalists. Some people say that he actually said there would be war to the death against all Puerto Ricans. Soon thereafter, Puerto Rican nationalists and the U.S.-led military government began to clash. The militarized police would begin to arrest nationalists and then execute them on the spot. This outraged the Puerto Rican population and only made Albizu Campos more popular to the chagrin of the authorities. In March of 1936, Albizu was arrested and charged with conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government. After the trial, U.S. military leaders sat in the front row as the jury delivered its verdict. Albizu was sentenced to 10 years in prison. From that day, in 1936, Albizu Campos lived another 29 years. He spent 25 of those 29 years in prison. After that conviction, he was sent to the USP Atlanta Penitentiary in 1937. He was arrested and jailed again in 1950 and again in 1954. Even during the few years that he was out of prison, Albizu was surrounded by FBI agents 24 hours a day. They even passed an anti-speech law just for him after his release from prison in 1947 called Law 53, the Gag Law. Of course, he ignored this law. It's also important to note that during Albizu's tenures in prison, it's likely that he was subjected to lethal doses of radiation which caused burns all over his body. The authorities declared him insane for making the accusations, but the physical evidence of Albizu's wounds and decay and testimony of other prisoners made it hard to deny. Dr. Orlando Daume, a world-renowned radiologist and president of the Cuban Cancer Association, examined Albizu and concluded that he had been subjected to total body irradiation. Pedro Albizu Campos died on April 1, 1965 at the age of 73, a few months after being released from prison. Albizu Campos understood that although Puerto Rico was not a nation politically, it was and is a nation culturally. He stood up at a time when it was difficult for the average Puerto Rican to enjoy even an ounce of dignity, and for that he paid with his life.
¿Están disfrutando de nuestro contenido? Su participación es crucial. Reaccionen, comenten y compartan. Además, ofrecemos diferentes formas de apoyarnos, como PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee y GoFundMe. Sus donaciones nos permiten dedicar más recursos a la creación de contenido. Gracias por su continuo respaldo. Somos Prensa Diferente. El cambio empieza conmigo.